Hello and welcome. Glad to see you. My name is Amanda McCall, and you are here because you are watching a presentation that was done with NCBOLD called Podcasting Palooza, Enhancing Learning Across All Grade Levels with Audio Adventure. So I'm going to go through this presentation for you and hope that I can answer or be as clear as possible throughout. But please, if you end up having questions in the end, don't hesitate to reach out. My email is amanda.mccall@carteretk12.org, and I would be happy to talk with you later and answer any questions that you might have. Okay. So my email is right here on this page, amanda.mccall@carteret, kind of got cut off a little bit, but k12.org. This is me and my two kids. Aubrey is a freshman at NC State this year. My son Hunter is a sophomore at West Carteret. And this is my husband, Rick. I'm a current media coordinator at Morehead City Primary School in Carteret County. So we work with the littles, grades kindergarten through third. And the way it works is I am in a fixed rotation. So I am part of the encore schedule. I see classes 2 days back to back for an hour each day. And then they go to my ITF, who works in the back of my library, for 2 days back to back. So a lot of what we do is collaborative in that we have them basically for 4 days for 4 hours total. So some of the stuff you'll see here today, if I refer to it as a we or us, that's probably who I'm talking about. This is just telling you to make sure that whatever your county has for its rules regarding its districts, its county's rules and technology department, just ensure that you are following with those same rules. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will understand a little bit more about podcasts and about the benefits of consuming podcasts in the classrooms, but also with producing and how it gives student choice and builds authentic learning and can elevate the engagement if done well. These are some of the participant outcomes. I'm not going to read these to you, but they are here for you to come back and look at if you need to reference them later. And these are how this presentation will align to the digital learning competencies. As an educator, they align in these ways. As an educational leader, they align in these ways. And for our students, this presentation will align in these ways. Okay, so we start out by asking, what is your experience with podcasts? And if we refer to the Padlet below, it'll give some different answers as to what other people have said. They've also included their contacts there. So if you want to reach out to one of these people, they've also attended this session and may benefit you to touch base with them if it's something that you feel like you can relate to. So thinking about podcasts as far as, do you listen to podcasts? Do you have you created a podcast? Have you listened to podcasts for entertainment or for education? Those type of things. If you have any questions throughout, this is where the parking deck is. However, because this is virtual, if you have any questions after viewing this presentation, I would love for you to reach out to me at my email, which is amanda.mccall@carteret, CARTERET, k12.org. And again, that's on that second slide if you missed it. Okay. So for podcasts, my colleague and I decided that we wanted to do podcasting and start that in our media center and start that with our school. But in order to do that, we had to get some buy-in from our staff. And so we offered a few years ago our first professional development regarding podcasting. And this is what it looked like. It was not required by any means. So I'm trying to move this out of the way. It was not required. It was optional because we wanted people who wanted to be there. And so we called it a give 30, get 1 hour. So essentially we met for 4 times on the dates listed. Teachers or educators, whoever signed up, came for 30 minutes, as you can see. And then they were asked to do some type of evaluation or some kind of reflection afterwards on their own time. They were kind of given a task and then they had to submit that. And then once we received that, they would receive an hour for the whole thing. So they were only in person for 30 minutes of it. These were the different topics, and we're kind of going to go through this presentation in the same way. But if you are in a leadership position in your school, and this is something that you are looking into doing, perhaps providing professional development in some form, our teachers like that. They only had to commit to being in person for 30 minutes and then had a week to do the other part. The reflection was simply a Google form. You can click on this link right here and it will take you to that. All right, so we started off with our teachers talking about podcasting with teachers as the audience. So some of our teachers in our building, some listen to podcasts avidly, but then we had some who really didn't even know how to find the app on their phone or an app on their phone that was a podcast. So we started from the very ground up, trying to build up to what is created eventually. So we talked about what a podcast was. It's an audio program, but it's for free. You can do it on your smartphone, on an iPad. You can look them up on a website, on the computer. We talked about how to listen to a podcast if you have an iPhone or an Android. We talked about different places or apps for podcasts that look like this. These should take you to the link. So if you were to click on this, it would take you to the actual link. If you clicked on this one, it would take you to Spotify. And then these are some of the different places that we recommended for our teachers to go and listen to podcasts for them. Again, these are linked. So if you clicked on We Are Teachers or Edutopia, it would take you to those places, because our teachers' job was, by the time they came back to us the next time, they had to have filled out that Google form that I showed you earlier, and they had to listen to one podcast, just one episode. And in that episode, in the reflection, I think it asked something like, did you enjoy this podcast? Would you listen to other episodes? Who do you think might benefit from this? Those type of things. We just wanted them to have exposure to understand what some podcasts are. The next week when they came back, we talked about podcasting with students as the audience. So now that they were a little bit more familiar and understood what podcasting was, we wanted them to talk about how that could benefit their students. And so we showed these reasons, which are, we've repeated, they're engaging, but they don't need internet. It cuts down on screen time. It's little prep for teachers. They serve many interests. For us, that's a big highlight, because our students, just like we are multifaceted and are interested in lots of different things, our students are the same way. So it's a good way for us to kind of plug podcasts, because they're easy and free and can go towards all different types of topics. So at our school at the time, we were our kindergarten and first graders in our county use iPads, and our second through 12th graders use Chromebooks. And so the way that we would share podcasts with students is we would share a link to the podcast, and on Seesaw, or for our K1s, we would do it through Seesaw, and at our school, our second and third graders, we would do this in the Google Classroom. And you could either do it with a link or a QR code. That's how we would share it with our students. And then we talked a little bit about how you can use them in the classroom. You could use it as a way to build that fluency. So perhaps, oftentimes, most podcasts have a transcript attached to them. So perhaps you are putting the podcast on and students are following along in the transcript as a read aloud type thing. Or maybe you're having them listen, it's a station and they're listening to it for independent work. Maybe you're talking about some moon and stars or the solar system, and you find a podcast that ties into that topic. And so that's one of the things they're doing, is trying to build that audio fluency, or that audio, being able to remember what they're hearing. Or as introducing a new unit. So for example, playing Why Can't Kids Vote, to introduce a government unit. And then these are a lot of different podcasts that we recommended that are all geared towards elementary students. There's tons out there for other grade levels as well, or other topics, curricular subjects as well. But these are all linked. So you can go to one of these or any of these and listen. This is ours, MCPS Dives into Reading. It's actually now MCPS Dives into Learning. This is also a good site, Common Sense Media. It's good in the sense that you can type in the name of a podcast, so Smash Boom Best, for example, and they'll come up. And we like it particularly to kind of give us an idea of the age. So obviously, if I'm looking for something for elementary, this would be something good for that level. But if I want something for high school, this probably wouldn't be a great one for them. Or if I want something for lower elementary, maybe this is a little too hard for them. So it's for different reasons, but that's one of the ones that we like to use, just to kind of give us an idea if we're in the right area for what we're looking for. But there's all these different ones up here. Some are more science related. Some are kind of history related. Some have Smash Boom Best is great for debating. This is different for Little Stories for Tiny People is great for like storytelling. So just a couple of different places and resources you can use to find podcasts for kids. The way we introduced podcasts in the Media Center, because while we were some of our teachers who came to our training, they were doing this as well, but not all of our teachers wanted to know about podcasts. However, we still wanted to give our students access to what a podcast was and teach them about it. So this is a lesson that we did with our students in the classroom or in the media center when they came through. If you click on this link, this green paper, it'll take you to the actual lesson. But we talked about with our kids, these are second graders that we did this with. We talked about what were podcasts, and we talked about when can you listen to a podcast. And then we had one of the big things that we talk about is oftentimes when we first introduce students to podcasts, for some reason in my mind, I didn't think about the fact that whenever I listen to a podcast, I'm typically not just sitting and listening to a podcast. I'm usually multitasking. So usually I might be cleaning and listening, or cooking and listening, or running and listening, or driving and listening. And so for me to expect a 7 or 8 year old to sit and just listen the whole time, that's most likely not going to happen. So it can, but oftentimes it can be used as a multitasking tool. So we let the students color a picture, just kind of a mindless activity as they listened to this one was money, always coin and paper bills, just so they could listen and understand. It's about a 15-minute podcast. And they were able to listen, and they were actually pretty quiet. Did they pick up on everything that they heard? Did they remember every single piece? No, but we told them that for our purpose, that wasn't necessarily the goal. I wouldn't use this as necessarily a main part of my instruction or the only thing that I'm instructing with, but I would use it as an additional resource, maybe to kind of hone in or to help kind of reinforce some of those skills that I've already taught. And then attached to slide 5, there's a podcast station that we have open in our media center once the year gets going. And we ask students to kind of give us their view or to reflect on the podcast. This also kind of plays back to them, because then if I see a student listening to podcasts and I see they're evaluating and I see that they're using this tool, then if they want to hear a podcast on LeBron James, for example, I'm more likely to go and try to find one out and take my time to seek that out, because I know it's a resource the student has been using. So if they're kind of giving me reviews and giving me their honest feedback, which is helping us kind of pick which ones are good or better for different students, then they get a little bit of say in what kind of podcast we're putting out there for them to listen to as well. So that's there. You have access to those things. On the same token, when we're talking about listening to podcasts, this kind of falls in. The Walking Classroom is a great resource. And I've linked it here. If you click on this element right here, it'll take you to a place, the Walking Classroom website. And if you complete this application, you can ask for to be granted a certain number of these walkables. So when I applied for this, we ended up getting 37 for free. So they're basically like a walk-it kit that goes around your neck, and they come with earbuds. I tell my students that if they have their own headphones, I would like them to use those, just because sometimes the earbuds don't fit the ears and they can get kind of gross. But there's about 167 different topics. There are already preloaded, so you can't add your own topics. They're geared towards really 2nd through 8th grade. So my kindergarten and first graders is a little too advanced probably for them. But if you're a 5th, 6th, 7th grade teacher, that's like perfect. Again, I'm in a primary school, so my 2nd and 3rd grade teachers, I have some in each grade level that use this, but it gets the kids outside. It's just a great resource, especially when you can apply for it for free. There's a video here that has some of my teachers and students talking about the Walking Classroom and things that they enjoy about it. I don't get paid by them. I don't get any kind of kickback, but I wanted you just to see that this kind of it ties into that audio and listening. Okay. So once my staff have a good idea of listening to podcasts, we then come into talking about creating podcasts. When we first started creating, we were using what started as Anchor and then turned into Spotify for podcasters. However, like every good thing in education happens every so often, our county then blocked Spotify. So we had to kind of pivot. So this past year, my ITF and I researched and kind of found that another school, actually middle school in our county, had been using Canva to create their podcast. And so that's what we have rotated towards. And that's what I'm going to show you how we currently use that. You don't have to have microphones for when you podcast. Yeah, all you really need are a computer or an iPad, and a plan. That's it. You could go as fancy as you want to go with it, but this is all you have to have. We did get a pair of microphones just because for our kids, especially the little, sometimes their voices get drowned out and you can't always hear them or they mumble. These are the specific headphones that we purchased from Amazon. You can click on it. It'll take you to the link, but you don't have to have these. You don't have to have any at all. We just wanted you to understand that these were the ones that we used in case you were curious. If you come to Canva, hopefully you already have an account set up, because that is where you would create it. As an educator, you get a free educator account, so that's what you need. Okay. Pros and cons. So I told you we used to use Anchor or Spotify for podcasters. Negative, recently it was blocked for student listening. So we could still create under like an adult account, but the problem was then when my students went to access it, they couldn't get to Spotify. So they couldn't hear each other, which was a problem. The benefit of Spotify was it was easy for public to access on a real podcast site. So for example, if I come to here, this is where it would be found on Spotify for podcasters. Here is MCPS Dives into Learning. That's the title of our podcast. And these are all the different episodes that we had recorded up until looks like February of 2023, because after that it got blocked. But parents could come in and type in MCPS Dives into Learning and they could hear our podcast. So that was pretty awesome. The negative of Canva is it does not automatically connect to a podcasting platform, but I'll show you the workaround that we did for that. The benefit or the pro is it can be downloaded as an MP4 and uploaded to a website. So that's what we did. On our school website that looks like this. This is our school website. And if you were to go to this website and if you were to go to news, you would see here student created podcast, MCPS Dives into Learning. And if you were to click that, it would take you to all of our podcasts that we have. So essentially, we've just put them in one location that now everybody can access, our students and our parents. Everybody can still access them. It's a bit more protected in the sense that you'd have to know what you're looking for. So whereas Spotify, you could just type something in and maybe accidentally find it. This, you have to kind of know what you're looking for. But that is for us a benefit that we have found, and that's kind of our workaround. All right, so let's talk about how to do this. Okay. We always start with our students when we're planning a sheet. Our goal was to get teachers to do maybe if they are having their students and they want to kind of have a reflection or an evaluation on what their students are doing with or how much they've interpreted what they've done with Sun, Moon, and Stars, or how much they've learned from Martin Luther King. Perhaps they could do a podcast on it. So ideally, they would have a podcast planning sheet that looks like this. This can look any way that you would like it to look. This is just what we have found works for us, but it's pretty basic. Ideally, if we were being fully collaborative with teachers and teachers were on board, which some are, the teacher's name would go here. The students that are recording would go here. The podcast show title would go here. So maybe it's Martin Luther King for Equal Rights. I don't know. They would come up with a name. And then the tagline or description would go here. If you open this one up, this is a sample completed plan. So here's one that was filled in with students. It tells you who the students were. It tells you the title that the kids and teacher came up with. It tells you the hook. And then it basically is the body, which is essentially just the script. So they're talking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. If you're doing it along with your students and you're kind of with them creating this, especially for the younger kids, the hope is that as they get more involved and the older the kids get, they can kind of come up with this part on their own eventually. Another hope would be that if you're collaborating with teachers, that maybe your teachers and the students have created this together, and then you're just doing maybe the tech piece of it. So you're just kind of bringing them in, helping them record and getting it all mashed together. It's really whatever you want to make it. And for us, it really just depended on timing and which teachers we had involved. So I'm going to take you through a step-by-step. Just so you know, though, this is a video recording right down here. It says NC Ties 24 podcasting using Canva. I told you that one of our middle schools in our county used Canva to create their podcast. And so this talks you through exactly what they did. Okay. So you can always come back and look here. Another point that you could look at is there's this to print right here. It's how to create a podcast template in Canva. So if you click on this and print it, it's 2 sheets, but it tells you step by step by step by step what to do. I'm going to show you right now what those steps look like, but I'm going to go kind of quickly. Just realize that that information is right there as well. And what I would do if I were you is I would print it out. So if I'm at Canva, and if I look back at it says create a design and then search podcast cover. So I'm over here at create a design. I'm going to type in podcast cover. And this is where you would pick whichever cover you would want, but then you could make it to where however you wanted it to be. Now you might notice that our podcast cover has it's MCPS dives into learning. So ours is like student created. So we basically had the student create the cover, and then we scanned it and we uploaded it. So around in your uploads, you could find any of these that you wanted and put that as your podcast cover. Okay. So for right now, I'm just going to go back to my podcast cover and pick one of these. Let's pick this one. I don't know. And your students or you would go in and you could put your title in, whatever you want it to be. Okay. You could change your background color. You could make it however you wanted it to be, but that would be step 1. All right. So step 1 was upload the image. From the slide view, it says duplicate the page approximately 11 times. So down here, that's talking about down here from the slide view. So I'm going to hit add page. I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to put duplicate page. And then I'm going to, you could also hit Control D. You basically want whatever that cover is after you've designed it, you want that same cover, that same picture for a certain amount of times. It doesn't have to be 11. I'll explain that in just a minute. But for right now, we just did 6. Okay. It says number 3, leave slide 1 blank to add the voiceover. And number 4, record the first segment on slide 2. So we're going to record on slide 2. We're going to click on slide 2. And this is, we're going to record our first audio segment. I'm going to try to get myself out of the way here. Let's see if I can make myself smaller. As small as I go. Ooh. Okay. Move myself over here for a minute. Okay. So we're going to record the first audio segment, and it's going to look like this. So I'm on slide 2. I'm going to elements. I'm going to audio, which is down here. And it shows you those right here. It says go to uploads and record yourself. So if I go to my uploads tab, which is right here, you should see record yourself. So I'm going to click it. Hello, this is Amanda McCall back for another podcast episode of Girl Talk Conversations. All right, if I wanted to listen back to it, I could. All right, if I'm happy with it, I can hit save and exit. If I want to re-record it, I could hit delete to re-record. I'm going to be able to I could change that shape if I wanted to, however you wanted to do it. But at this point, I'm just going to put save and exit. All right. So right there, there's myself. We're going to be able to take this, and I can make this as small as I want because unfortunately it is going to be on there, but you don't have to actually be able to see it. Okay. You could just make it as teeny tiny small as you want. You're still going to be able to hear it. Okay. So that's slide 2. All right. On our next one, it says repeat step 4 on each sequential slide until the entire podcast is complete. So this is where I would go through, and wherever that, the text is for whatever students are recording. Remember, I showed you that podcast plan. I would go to each slide. So if slide 3 had my hook, I would go here and I would hit record myself, and whoever was the next one to talk would talk. The way that we have found it works best for us is that each, we kind of break it into chunks. So if I'm back here and I am looking at this podcasting plan, for example, If we go all the way through and Dre and Zoe are going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then all of a sudden we get way down here and Zoe ends up stumbling over these words, well, then we've got to go back and delete that whole segment and start over, which for kids, for grown-ups too, but for kids could be a bit frustrating. So what we did is we kind of break it into segments. So maybe we do for 4 lines, maybe those 4 lines will go on slide 4. And maybe these lines go on slide 5. And maybe the next 4 lines go on slide 6. Maybe the next lines go on slide 7. So when I told you that it doesn't matter how many slides you have, that's kind of why there's not a set number of 12 or 15 slides, because you kind of break it up, whatever works for you and the age of your student. You can try to do it all in one take and put them all on slide 3, but you might run into the issue of kind of that stumbling, or one person messes up, or it's not as fluent as they wanted. And then you have to go back and re-record. And it just becomes a bit frustrating. So that's really up to you and your students. But I might put a few lines on this one, a few lines on 4, a few lines on 5, a few lines on 6. However you want to do it. On each one, you would click on the slide, hit record yourself, and start recording. And the one thing I will say with Canva is I always give it about a second before I tell my students to start talking, because it'll kind of cut you off there at the beginning, unless you give it that little bit of buffer time. So I usually give it about a second at the front and a second at the end before we record. Okay. So we've done that. Okay. We divided it into segments. We talked about that. All right. Let's talk about the fun stuff. So after we go through and get the entire podcast created, as far as just the voices in, then you've got to get to go back and do the fun stuff. So maybe you want to add some music. So let's say, remember I told you slide 1, we were not recording any kind of voice on that. Maybe that's because oftentimes in a real podcast you might hear on Spotify or something like that, you'll hear intro music. So we want to add music. So what we're going to do for this one is you're going to come down and you should have a button that says apps. And when you search in your apps, if you type in music, it'll bring up different music things for you to add. You can use any of these. The one that I'm most familiar with is this one right here, Melody Music or Melody Muse. Okay. And you can explore different songs. If you hit generate, it kind of comes up with this weird AI funky thing. You can do that. But I like to hit explore. So this is where we talk to kids about theme oftentimes. So if maybe they're doing something mysterious, or they're talking about something scientific or something like unsolved mystery type, you might do that kind of music, kind of spooky music. Or maybe they're talking about a book review and it was a very happy book. And so you want to give it that kind of thematic music. So let's just say that we're talking, I want a mysterious. So I'm just going to type in mysterious to see what comes up. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than others. We'll see. So I'm going to be back on slide 1. Remember, that's where I'm going to put this music. And I can sit and listen to it. So let's see what this one sounds like. All right. So I clicked it and you can see it dropped it in right here. Okay. I can then sit here and it's only 4 seconds long. I can shorten it. Okay. But if I come in here and I hit audio effects, I can fade it in. I can fade it out. So that way it's not quite so abrupt when it goes from slide 1 to slide 2. Okay. If maybe I want it longer than 40 seconds, or 4 seconds, excuse me, maybe I can click duration here. And I can duplicate it. So maybe I will, right now, this is what it's going to sound like. Okay. So I would want to be able to duplicate that. Okay. I would want that to be able to, I'm going to right click on here and I'm going to hit duplicate track, because maybe it goes, now I've got 2 of them. And then I could always shorten this one if I wanted to. So let's see what that sounds like. Here we go. All right. So you would kind of play with that to get it to where you wanted it to be. This is where you could kind of get sucked into all the editing. If you have older students who can sit and play with this until it gets just right, great. Because you could play with the fade in, you could play with the fade out. You could do all types of things with it. But for time purposes, we're going to stay there for right this moment. All right, so that's how you would add music. We typically add music to the front and to the end, the very last one. Usually it's the same music on both ends. The last thing that we wanted to show you was how to add sound effects. So again, back to that template. If you're in audio and you search the sound effect you're looking for, so if I come back over here and I'm in my audio, which is right here, okay, you might end up having to type in your search bar and look for audio. But once I'm in audio right here, I can type in, maybe I want laughter. Our students always put in a joke. So maybe after slide 1, I decide that I want laughing to go here. So we can listen and drop it in. Just like earlier, I could shrink it. I don't think I need 6 seconds of laughing. Maybe I want 1 second of laughing. I can click on it. I can hit audio effects. I can fade it in, fade it out, or whatever I needed to do. It says adjust, so I can kind of play with it there. And this is what that might sound like. Okay, so that's what that would sound like right there. All right, so we've gone through all of these things. Okay, we've shown you how to create your cover. We've shown you how to add audio. We've shown you how to add music. We've shown you how to add sound effects. Once all of that is done and you've got it all said and done, you might be calling students back multiple times. It's up to you and how much time you have as far as spending on it and the age of your students. But once you're done with this and you've gone through all those different steps, the way we did it was we went to the share button. Let me move myself over. We went to the share button and we go here to where it says download, and we download as an MP4 video. So it'll download. You download all 6 pages because it's going to be one big MP4 player that just goes on and on and on. The only thing you're going to be able to see is whatever your cover is. And then depending on how big your little person was. But once you've downloaded it, you would go to Google Classroom. At least that's where we went, and we uploaded it there to Google Classroom. And then that's where we pulled the link to put on our website. Okay. If that was too fast, you can go back and watch the video, or you can look at this video right here because that shows you also what we just did. If you were if you teach older students, so middle school or high school, or this is a school in our county called Newport Middle School, they do a podcast as well. And so if you go to this Facebook link, this will take you to their Facebook page, where you can access some of the podcasts that some of their middle school students have done. And this is a generic podcast rubric that they've used in middle school, as well as some podcasting ideas by content area. So for older kids, we just wanted to make sure that you have that available for you if you work with older students. This is a Padlet that you can go to. Some of our staff, after we did training with them, these are some ideas for collaboration that they gave. We wanted to get that to you in case you found a few things maybe that you're like, I'm not sure how I would use podcasting, but this might give you some ideas for how you could use it or how you could incorporate it. And then these were just questions if you had them along the way. But as I stated earlier, if you have questions, please email me. I will be happy to try and help you, or we can set up a call or a Zoom to try to get through and get you as many answers as you can. So I hope that was helpful to you and that you can take away something back to your school system. Have a great day.